Hey everyone, so the end of the last video was a bit rushed, so I'm just going to recap that four-step approach again. And really this four-step approach is to ensure that you get the classification of variable and fixed cost correctly, because as we mentioned before, cost classification is vital in making a decision, and so therefore you want to have the correct classification to make the most correct decision. So step one is you have to ask yourself what is the cost of the sales driver. In other words, what is going to cause total cost or total sales to increase. So if we take a concert, for example, any of the famous artists, Justin Bieber, Beyonce, any of their concerts, the cost, the thing that will cause the sales to increase is the number of tickets that sold for that concert. And the more people there are, there may be certain costs that also increase because of the number of people that will attend. So for a concert, typically the sales driver would be the number of tickets that they sell. And then step two, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, any cost related to that concert, will it be affected by the number of tickets sold? So for example, we ask ourselves the cost for the security. Well, typically security is not dependent on the number of tickets sold. In other words, you can't take the cost of security and multiply by the number of people that will attend that show. And so therefore, the security, following this four-step approach, would be a no. So if the answer to step two is no, then you have a fixed cost. However, if which typically happens in South Africa, tickets are sold through CompuTicket, and CompuTicket takes a percentage of that sales. And so for every ticket that's sold, CompuTicket will take a percentage, and that percentage is commission, and that commission will be affected by the number of tickets sold, and so therefore we have a variable cost because it's affected by the number of tickets sold. And so if the answer to step two is yes, in other words, if the cost is affected by the number of tickets, or to make it simpler, if you can take the number of tickets and multiply it with this cost, then you have a variable cost. Alright, so that's the four-step approach. So just to quickly do one example, Highfly uses the new A380 aeroplane. On an aircraft of this size, six air hostesses are required per flight, so two required there. One is, if the revenue of Highfly is based on the number of passenger tickets, is the cost of the air hostess a fixed or a variable cost? And part two is, if the revenue of Highfly is based on the number of flights, is the cost of the air hostess a fixed or a variable cost? So required one, following the four-step approach, the sales driver based on the required one would be the number of passengers. Alright, so now the next question to ask then is the cost of the air hostesses affected by the number of passengers? In other words, can you take the costs of the air hostesses and multiply with the number of passengers? The answer to that question is clearly no. You can't take the cost of the air hostess and multiply with the number of passengers, and then based on this four-step approach, the air hostesses would be a variable cost. So a fixed cost. So the answer to number one is that we have a fixed cost. Okay, then for number two, if the revenue of Highfly is based on the number of flights, is the cost of the air hostesses a fixed or a variable cost? Alright, so following the four-step approach, what is the sales driver? Well, it's number of flights. Alright, so can we take the air hostesses and multiply with the number of flights? Yes, because there are six air hostesses per flight, and so therefore we can take the cost of the six air hostesses and multiply with the number of flights, and because of that we have a yes for step three, and that means we have a variable cost. Now, I know practically in real life a company's revenue, airline's revenue would not be based on the number of flights, but hypothetically, if that were to be the case, in that scenario, the air hostesses would be a variable cost. So, to do a slightly more advanced example, Highfly uses 50,000 liters of jet fuel on its new Airbus 380 for its flights from Cape Town International Airport to JFK, New York, known as the Cape Town, New York route. Now the question is the cost of fuel a fixed or a variable cost for the Cape Town, New York route? Now, many of us at first first glance would say, well, fuel, you pay, the more you fly, the more kilometers you fly, the more fuel you're going to use. However, the important thing to remember here is that it's a fixed route. So therefore, you have to follow the 4-step approach. Now, if you follow the 4-step approach, for an airline, the sales driver would be the number of passenger tickets. And so now we have to ask, is the fuel affected by the number of passenger tickets? In other words, can you take the fuel and multiply with the number of passengers? Clearly you can't, and so therefore you have, like in step number 4, the answer to step 2 is, will the fuel be changed by the number of passenger tickets? The answer to that is no, and so therefore it's a fixed cost. So in example 4, the cost of the fuel is a fixed cost. Awesome. So I hope the 4-step approach has been helpful, and check back in the next video. Thanks.